need 25% more work when I could give them 2 tracks that need 5% more work, you know?
Yeah, I totally get it. I feel like it also depends on, your relationship with your mastering engineer,
Yes.
communication. And like, it could be that you work with one mastering engineer who what they're going to do because you guys have a working relationship. And then, it's like, okay, this person is going to add this and I know that that's what they do.
Right.
Versus, sometimes the client wants to work with a different mastering engineer and it's like, okay, I'm going to, I guess, protect my mix a bit more so that,
Right.
it's a little closer to that, the end goal, the end line.
Exactly. And, that's a common situation because, a lot of times we don't talk to our clients about who's going to be mastering it sometimes until it's already done. And to that point,
yeah, it's something that really I'm realizing is something that maybe should be brought up at the very beginning of like, this is my rate. It just includes my mastering engineer because I think,
exactly. And I've started doing that too. And basically being like, I'm going to send it to Ian or one of the other people, but like, this is it. And it's like, if you don't like that, then we can send it to someone else. But now because my mixes are where they are, I don't need to worry about if it gets sent to somebody else. The only thing I need to worry about is if that person fucks it up. So, if we're sending it to someone who's doing a $10 master, because the client can't afford it, then if we get the master back and it sounds like shit, then I have to have the, conversation with the client and be like, look, I understand your budget doesn't allow for us to send to a better mastering engineer. And I have to decide whether, I need to eat the cost and send it to a better mastering engineer. Whew, swallowed that one. A better mastering engineer. Or I need to just make it a little bit louder and try to tread really lightly and master it myself because it's at least I'll have less of an urge or hopefully have less of an urge to really fuck up the hard work that got us to where we are right now.
Yeah, totally. Dude, thank you for illuminating your master bus processing, your mix bus
3
processing.
3 hours later.
It's like, no, it's great. I think it's like, it was so detailed that it was just like really, I don't know, I felt it really eye-opening to kind of like get into your brain and see what someone else is doing. And, I'm doing a fraction of what you're doing, but a lot of the same principles, you know what I mean? Like, and that's like, it's like reassuring, but it's also like badass to hear what you're doing with these different things. And I definitely want to check out some of those plugins that you mentioned.
Totally. And I think it's also nice, like at least when I had a less aggressive mix bus, it was always kind of, it's like, when you hear someone miking up a shotgun sound or something like that, or a loud explosive, you're like, oh shit, your microphone can do that. And it doesn't hurt anything and everything's okay. It's kind of like that of like being like, oh shit, you have 30 plugins on your mix bus, but it's working. Like, oh, like maybe I can add 5 more and it's not going to deter anything and maybe it'll be better or maybe it'll be worse. But I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying like I've had those experiences of just being like, oh shit, like I can do whatever the fuck I want as long as I understand what I'm doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I feel like people are afraid of doing too much, and I think there's
100%.
a lot of information on the internet to like be careful, and I think that makes sense because a lot of people are just starting. Like when you're a noob, you don't want to do too much because you will probably fuck it up.
Yeah.
But as you've kind of grow and you learn what works and doesn't work, you can kind of add to your arsenal.
Exactly.
I remember I had a conversation with a guy out of New York named Alex Sterling, and he was saying like at a certain point I realized like I just do whatever the fuck I want with an EQ and go crazy, and it really works for me. I just go crazy with lots of plugins and just until I find that the mix works. Yep. And and that's okay. And that's how I'm working. And like I don't have to feel bad about over EQing or whatever.
Exactly.
It works for me.
Exactly.
And that's why I love the Pro Q3 because I can over EQ everything and get away with it, and I don't hear any issues.
Right. And the nice part about that plugin too is even if you over EQ everything, it has that function where you can bring down the percentage, and do it globally with all the if you have all the plugins automated together, you can bring it down, or bring it up. Like if you want to hear it, everything even more exaggerated. So like, yeah, exactly. It's just modern technology makes it so easy, but a lot of us fall in the trap of that kind of laziness of like not really wanting to experiment what the extremes actually are, or just taking the time to experiment, like I just said, about those extremes. Like what happens if you put a Pultec all the way on 10? Like one of my favorite Mix with the Masters videos is watching the late, oh man.
When
he's the guy who worked with Phoenix and Franz Ferdinand.
Philippe Zdar?
Yeah, Zadar. Yes, he died I want to say he died in 2019, falling off a balcony in Paris or something like that. It was not that long ago, but he is so good. And his video especially, not a lot of people check it out, and it's something that I always recommend to anyone who has mixed with the masters, and that is because there's something just so beautiful about the way he approaches mixing. You'll see on his things, it'll be like, well, a Pultec can go to 10, so why not we just push it to 10? And you do it and you hear it and you're just like, oh shit, that's really good. And the world mix that I just did, there was a track where I did that. I had my Pultec slammed at 100 all the way to the 10 on the Pultec setting, and it just sounded good. It added everything that I needed it to add, and it was kind of like, yeah, well, why, I need to do this shit more often because I know what it sounds like and I know what it can do, and it doesn't break anything. That's the beautiful thing about mixing. You touch a knob and no one dies.
Yeah, right. Exactly. It's not
you can do whatever you want.
Doing surgery.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, sometimes you do need to be gentle, and I think that's maybe the most subtle art of mixing is knowing when to keep your hands off of something.
Right.
You know what I mean?
It's doing those experiments so that you can do it at the right times, not just autopilot and do it all the time. It's all tools in a tool belt.
Yeah, I think pushing through extremes is something that it's really something that I need to do more. And just the way you were talking about even the SSL compressor, I've never tried that setting on the SSL compressor just because I kind of figured this is what works for me. And this is what most people are kind of doing. So maybe, I did, I changed it from 30 to 10 and then but it's time to check out more options just to see what it sounds like. And then when you see, you'll know.
Exactly. And it's I was the same way. A lot of the mixers that I really always looked up to, they were always 10 or 30 on their mix bus. And a lot of them were auto release. I've never liked auto release on SSL. It just sounds bad to me. There's sometimes it does work. There's a very rare occurrence for me that I can actually get it to work how I want it to, but it always ends up sounding too compressed with the auto one and not in a good way. But for me, it was Bob Clearmountain watching a video that he did, and people were asking, he was asked what he uses on his mix bus, and he's the godfather of mixing. And it's oh, okay, you use 0.3 and he uses 600 millisecond release. He uses an even slower. I cannot get 600 millisecond release to ever work. 300 is kind of my tap out at the moment. But if you listen to his shit, if you listen to the David Bowie stuff, you listen to the Stones, you listen to all of that stuff, that shit hits hard. Those are excellent mixes. And it's kind of oh shit, oh yeah, you can do this. And yeah, sometimes he's pinning his meter or, he's getting 6 to 8 dB of compression, but because he knows how to set up his mix going into it, you don't hear that. And I think that's the big thing is again, it's training your ears, spending the 10,000 hours that we so-called take to become a master and really understanding how everything works and and training your ears to not you can't rely on a bad set of ears. A bad set of ears is just like a bad set of monitors. They have to be trained and tuned to what you're trying to achieve and what, the end goal is. And so the same thing goes with that. It's just kind of I always have loved his mixes and it was okay, cool, let me try this. And the minute I tried it, the mastering engineer that I worked at the time texted me right away after I sent him a mix and he goes, "This is the most glued mix you've ever sent me. I haven't had to do any gluing on it." And I was like, great, this is my setting now. This is it. I will make this work.
Yeah, wow, it's amazing. Oh, dude, we're already getting so long in the tooth, and I want to ask you a couple more questions and do the sauce segment.
Let's do it. People are just going to have to suffer.
People are going to just have to suffer. So I know that you did send out one of your bands. You have a band called Life of Death.
Yes.
And you sent out one of the tracks to Tim O'Sullivan for mixing.
Yes.
What led you to do that, to kind of send it out? What was that thought process? And, so I'd be curious to hear about that.
That was something I learned from doing other songwriting projects with my songwriting partner, whose name is James Abood. He's an amazing musician. we wrote a couple of tunes, and again, thankfully for me breaking my thumb, I was actually able to revisit songs that we had recorded like 3 years ago and never got released because it was on like mix revision 50 because I was just never happy with it. And I was just way too invested in the music that I was doing because it was my own. Like I actually had IP to it. It was my baby. And so I realized like, if I send this to someone else, I'm not going to be giving them 3 pages of notes. Like as long as, they do a good job and they're a good mixer and they're in the, as long as I pick the mixer correctly for the piece of music, it's going to work. And for me, I loved the work that Tim was doing and is doing. And, when I approached him and sent him the first song, which was Holding Pattern, I was like, hey, my first thing was just like, hey, listen to the song at where it's at. And like, if you dig it, like, let's do this. But if it's not your cup of tea, that's fine with me. And so we started our relationship, and that's kind of been it. Like, when I work with artists and I'm producing it all the way, the reason why I'm able to mix it is there's still some level of detachment for me. Like I still like, even though I have my skin in the game, I can be a lot more subjective and objective when it comes to mixing. And I also don't get offended if someone wants to send it to another mixer. That's fine too. I completely understand. Like, that's how records are usually made. You have an engineer that records everything with a producer, then it usually gets sent to another person to mix, and then it usually gets sent to another person to master, traditionally speaking. So I can't get offended if someone wants to do that. It's just, that's the way it is. And the more perspectives that you have on the music, the better it can be. And that's kind of was my approach to it. And since we have the budget to pay Tim his mix fee and to pay Ian his mastering fee and to have that luxury, we wanted to kick it to him and be like, hey, what can you do with this now? And Tim always adds a flair. And in some songs, it's a lot more. And in some, it's just enhancing what we've already done. And, again, the amount of notes that we talk about, maybe in Tim's mind, it's aggravating, but it's very small. And like, we're focused on like really just tiny details, but he does such a good job that, I don't have to worry about it as long as I'm sending him the music that I think he would do a great job at, And so that's my kind of philosophy for it, is just like, I'm going to spend 2 years mixing a song when I can send it to someone and it'll be mixed next week and it will be the same, if not better quality and a different perspective. So let's do it.
Yeah, I love that. I think so much of things I'm realizing that I just need to like bring more people into my creative process. And the reason for that is bottlenecks. And the bottleneck is usually me. So it's maybe I'm procrastinating tuning vocals. So let me send it to someone else so I could keep moving on and keep finishing projects, right? Like maybe,
Exactly.
Mastering is amazing because it gives me, I don't have to sign off on it, and I don't have to, question myself a million times. You know what I mean? Bringing other people in, I think for me is about getting that extra. Bringing more people in is just, getting that objectivity, getting feedback, getting more brains on it.
Exactly.
Just helps,
And it goes back to what we talked about it, 3 hours ago. Is that
we're exaggerating the length of the podcast,
right? Is that
I think we're at 2 hours.
Yeah, something. But is that you're not hiring someone to fix your home who you don't trust. So you're not hiring a mix engineer who you have no idea what he's doing, or theoretically, hopefully you're not, and you don't know his quality of work and you don't know what he's good at. So like, again, because I am a mixer and an engineer just like you, like if I'm going to send it to someone else, I'm going to do my research of who I want to send it to. Because then again, it's the same thing. You're not going to have 8 pages of notes. I'm not going to send a hip hop track to Michael Brower. I'm sure he could mix the ever-loving shit out of it, but like, why would I not send it to Jason Joshua, who does that way better? And it's just one of those things of just being like, not that either one of them couldn't do a great mix on whatever genre, but it's like, if the person really is breathing a certain specific area of music and that's, what they're really known for, then that's what I want to feed them, because that's what they know what to do with the most, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah. I love it. You got to specialize or know the right people who specialize. And
exactly.
Man, it's so hard because, like, as somebody who works in a small town, I mean, Jerusalem's not very small, but it's pretty small. It's like, it's hard to niche down because you end up, doing a little bit of this, that, and the other in order to kind of pay the bills or whatever.
Right.
So specializing is, I feel like, it's just in our industry is like, unless you're like in LA, I've heard